Well, hello, Second Corinthians students. As we near the end of the course, your work from now will subsist of the research paper. And to that end, I have developed a guide entitled A Guide to Successful Research Papers in Second Corinthians that I'd simply like to walk through with you now. The purpose of the guide is to identify some common pitfalls that I see students sometimes falling into when it comes to writing research papers, and really giving you a confident process that I think you can use across your seminary classes. A big part of a seminary degree is making sure that you can write confidently at the graduate level. And this process that I've laid out for you is not one that you have to follow. In fact, maybe you already have your own process which works well, but it's the process that I have always used for writing papers, published articles, and even books. And I think it's really simple and allows you to write with alignment and to write with efficiency so that you can save time. I'm convinced that so many papers become amorphous along the way, and that is, we just start to write without a clear direction. And what happens is not necessarily that we come out with a bad paper at the end. What happens is that we waste a lot of time. And so I've created a pipeline of direction, research, and writing that I think can save you a bunch of time along the way. So let me pull that document up and just walk through it with you. First, you'll see the due date, which for this semester is August 8th in the summer of 2016. So I try to give you as much time as I can before grades are due on my end, so that you have a week or two after the course to get this in. First step, as you'll see, is to understand the nature of a research paper. And this will be helpful for those of you who perhaps have been out of school for some time. We're not looking here for a devotional reflection on a text from 2 Corinthians. We're not looking for a sermon. All those are good. But in this assignment, we're really looking for you to engage the modern, current, scholarly conversation about a particular theme or passage in 2 Corinthians, so that you can carve out your own position. A great way to think about this is to think in terms of the various voices of your sources, and to say things like, well, 3 of my sources feel this way about my particular topic, 3 feel that way. Here's who I think is right and why. That's the kind of conversation that's going on along the course of your paper. Second step is to choose a topic. You may choose either a theme or a passage from 2 Corinthians. I'd really encourage you to choose a passage. I think that's a lot easier than a theme. However, some students want to do pneumatology, or the study of the Holy Spirit in 2 Corinthians, or Paul's opponents in 2 Corinthians. You can certainly do that, and I'm happy to serve as a personal sounding board if that's helpful to you. I think choosing a specific passage just allows you very naturally to focus on what you're doing, as opposed to feeling like you have to piece things together from this giant letter as it is. I also want to say, and this is in the guide as well, that it's very important to be very light in engaging any texts outside of 2 Corinthians. This doesn't need to suddenly become a paper on Paul at large. I think that's the most fruitful way to attack a book study. I think you get more out of it when you really have to focus on this clear boundaried set of data. And so I want to encourage you to just engage 2 Corinthians texts, except for cases where Paul's use of specific vocabulary in other texts can be helpful to the argument that you're making. Step 2, under choose a topic, I always encourage students to construct 3 to 5 initial questions that grab your attention about your text or topic. You're not using research materials at this point. You're just looking at things that are curious. As in, what on earth does Paul mean when he says in 2 Corinthians 5 that we used to know Jesus in a particular way? I mean, some scholars have said that Paul's referring to the historical Jesus, and he had contact with him. Who are these super apostles? Are they the same as the false apostles? All kinds of incisive questions that you can pick up on just from reading the text that interests you. And then number 3, begin to think about the following considerations. If this passage has a corollary in other Pauline letters, how does he individually shape the material in 2 Corinthians? Paul doesn't only talk about comfort and apostleship here, but boy, he zeroes in on it in very specific and distinctive ways in 2 Corinthians. Secondly, how does this passage fit into primary theological themes of 2 Corinthians? When Paul is comforting the brother who needs to be restored in 2 Corinthians 1 and 2. How is that theme even larger than that specific situation? And then third, and I actually think most importantly, how does my passage contribute to the message and theology of 2 Corinthians as a whole? If you had Pentecostal explorations of the New Testament with me or with Dr. Thomas, you know that a drum we really beat when you're looking at one book of the New Testament is to answer the question, if this book were excised from the Bible, what would we lose? You could do the same thing with your passage within 2 Corinthians, asking from your passage to the letter as a whole, and it will just unveil and unearth ideas in your head as you think through this that I think will be fruitful. Step number 3 is to compile a list of sources. We're looking for at least 8 sources in a paper of this length. And you'll see that I've laid out some specific criteria for those sources that make sure, again, that you're engaging the modern scholarly conversation. You have the skills to do that. And the best place to engage that conversation is to appeal to recent commentaries, recent monographs or books on 2 Corinthians, and recent journal articles. And the really great news is that the ATLA database, which you have access to through the Lee University Library, which is in conjunction with your student status at PTS, you can engage, you can find and download all kinds of scholarly journal articles for free, and it only takes a few minutes. I have a video about that walks you through that I can post to this session as well. But it's a really, really great resource. If you don't live anywhere near a theological library, you can use your textbook, you can use some of the articles that we've studied in the class if those are helpful, and you can use the ATLA database and have everything you need without driving hours to get to a library. I have a list of sources that we really want you to avoid, such as internet websites, whole Bible commentaries, works published before 1970, a study Bible that's not a source, and other sources that you can use but aren't really considered a source that should be in your bibliography. Please don't forget how much impact a basic concordance can have. I use my concordance as much as any research source, especially when constructing sermons or articles. It's just, and you don't need to know Greek to use it. It's a great way to get at Paul's language there. Finally, step number 4, after your sources are compiled, is to find a way to garnish data from your sources. And I've developed just a very simple way to do this over time. It's kind of an electronic equivalent to the old note card system that some of you will remember from high school. I simply take my source, I write the title and year and the publication data for the source at the top of a Microsoft Word document, and then I bullet point the data that I know is going to be helpful to my paper. Some of that is direct quotes when I think those can be really helpful and incisive. Other times I'm just summarizing what I've written. I do that for each of my sources, and the reason that I do that is so that I have all of the data that I need in one document in front of me. I find that it makes writing so much more efficient. I don't have 8 books and articles laid out in front of me trying to remember where things are. After I have that data out, I begin to categorize it according to what I want to do in my paper. If you're using a passage, sometimes you can categorize it according to what your source says about each verse. And just have the verse and what each source says about it underneath. Again, I can provide a sample for how I do this. I actually color code my sources so that I can move them around under categories. What Paul believes about apostleship, what Paul believes about the super apostles, how Paul contests the super apostles, Paul's use of irony against the super apostles, those kinds of categories, and then I can take my color coded data, just drop it in so that I have a flow now for writing my paper. After I do all that, I actually wait typically until I've just got my head immersed in all that source material to develop a thesis statement. And I have, under step 5 in the document, some examples of what a thesis statement is and isn't. This is typically the critical error of graduate level writing, that we don't actually craft an edge as to what the paper is trying to do. I'm advising a dissertation right now, and this student has done some very, very fine work thus far, but still doesn't have a thesis statement, and that's okay. Writing my own dissertation, I probably had, I was still crafting my thesis statement at the end. I was refining what I was actually doing after a couple hundred pages were written. So that's perfectly fine. But you'll see some examples there of correct thesis statements. In this paper, I will argue that the problem in 2 Corinthians 8:9 is written to higher status persons in the Corinthian church with the capacity to give sizable gifts. It's really specific. Now contrast that to an incorrect thesis statement. In this paper, I will exegete or explore 2 Corinthians 5 to see how Paul understands his own apostolic mandate. It's close. You've developed a direction, but you haven't told the reader where that direction leads. And the best thesis statements crystallize where the paper is ending up at the very beginning. And when you do that, you're just going to find out that your writing is so much faster because you're not feeling around along the way. So again, more detail there in the document that I won't go over on this video. Step 6, the step that most students skip that can save you the most amount of time, is developing an outline in complete sentences. Walter Brueggemann taught me to do this when I was his student back in seminary, and it just stuck with me. He just made us do it. It's such a pain because the brain wants to jump to just writing, but if you'll keep this step, it'll save you lots of time, and you can literally drop in the sentences from your sentence outline into the head of your paragraphs, so that your direction is right there, but crafting that direction in advance. And if you'd like to see an example of a sentence outline, I can certainly send that to you. Step 7 is write the first draft. And you'll notice that I always teach an hourglass approach to writing papers. And by that I mean this. First we're going broad, then we're going narrow, that is really focusing on our passage or topic, then we're going broad again. So by this I mean, first we go broad. What are the themes, the vocabulary, the historical contextual pieces that are important broadly in 2 Corinthians that are going to contribute to the study of your specific passage? So if I'm doing something on the super apostles in 2 Corinthians 10 through 13, I might start with a section about apostleship in 2 Corinthians and how this has become a main theme. Paul's in this dramatic fight with certain rival leaders. This, by the way, is where you can tackle whether or not you think a partition theory makes sense between chapters 10 and 11. You kind of just set up the theme broadly. Then specifically, your work on your passage. This is the bulk of your paper. And then broadly, as a third step, okay, how does your work contribute again to 2 Corinthians as a whole? So broad, narrow, broad. And again, a little more specific example in step 7, along with some words on footnotes. As you know, we use Turabian citation here in biblical studies at the seminary. The internet can really help you if you're not quite accustomed to that. And then finally, in step 8, I've got a section here on fine-tuning for the final draft. I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, to read this section and to read common mistakes to avoid. Because at the graduate level, when we get to the final paper, grammar matters and syntax matters and getting that stuff right matters. If you're not quite confident in that, if it's been a while, PTS offers a free writing lab, and I can send you the email address. They'll look at your paper. They will help you refine it. But I've got data here on verb tense and semicolons and just basic simplicity is the word here. See Jane run is a beautiful English sentence. And don't be afraid for your language to be really simple there. So I really encourage you to read through that. Don't quote the biblical text in your paper. I have the Bible just like you do, just chapters and verses are fine. Don't overuse quotations from your sources, not the best way to do it. You only quote directly when you really need to. Make sure to understand how block quoting works if you're quoting more than 5 lines. Just a lot of basics and this is a running list that I work on every year as I'm just trying to help students write better. So to that end, I'm certainly here for you as a sounding board. You can call me. We can set up a video chat. If you get stuck on your paper, I want you to feel properly shepherded, and I want you to feel that I'm cheering on your success. I want you to do well, and I want to help you do better, because this is a skill that can just carry you on through your ministry and through your academic career. So that's it. I look forward to getting your papers and to providing specific feedback on them. Thanks, guys. Blessings.